bank and I start hiring people that are going to go out and pull a job, then I've crossed the line. You see, I'm actually doing something with my theory.
Yeah, I think they call that conspiracy at that point.
They call it a conspiracy at that point, and eventually they're going to call it, just if I get through with it, they call it a bank robbery and throw me in jail for the rest of my life.
Something like that, yes.
Here, actually, I'd probably get, 2 years in a soft prison somewhere. But, well, no, wait a minute. No, I'm not a member of the global elite, so I'd probably get 20, 25 to life.
Well, certainly you'd get cable TV in a workout room,
I'd certainly get cable TV. So there was 97 people from the United States that belonged to this group, John. They were evenly spread across Democrats and Republicans. This was not a partisan group at all. They included people from both sides. It included bankers, industrialists, academics, politicians, media like Time Magazine, Newsweek, law firms, and NGOs. And in 1976 then, 3 years after they were formed, when Jimmy Carter came to power, the first thing that struck me was that Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale were both members of the Trilateral Commission. Well, that's interesting. That's convenient. And so the first appointment that Jimmy Carter made was to put Brzezinski in as National Security Advisor. Well, that's three now. Okay, three out of how many? There were a total of 97 from the U.S. Well, that's convenient. So Brzezinski came in as NSA. And I don't know if you remember back to Jimmy Carter, but he was a peanut farmer from Georgia who said he had no connections to the Beltway whatsoever. And he said, I'm going to have a terrible time appointing people to find people. I mean, I don't know anybody, so who am I going to appoint? And so he's poor boying this thing, right? Oh, shucks, I'm just a peanut farmer from Georgia. I don't know anything about Washington here, but I'm going to come straighten it out. And another thing he said to us, he said, I will never lie to you. He said that. That was a major campaign plank. I will never lie. I promise I'll never lie to you. And of course, he said he was a Southern Baptist and he carried a Bible with him lots of times too. But okay, that aside, here comes Jimmy Carter. He then proceeded one by one to appoint almost 1/3 of those 97 members to top cabinet and administration posts. For almost all of his 4 years, all but one of his cabinet positions were held by a non-member of the Trilateral Commission. Now, you can see maybe at that point why Sutton and I were concerned. If they were Boy Scouts, I would have been concerned. I mean, I don't care what group they belong to. If they belong to the same health club, I would be concerned. Like, that just doesn't happen in real life. And so this Trilateral Commission filled up Carter's administration. And we thought this through, and we thought, okay, now 1/3 of these memberships are from Japan, 1/3 are from Europe, and only 1/3 from North America, and only 97 from the United States. They get together in plenary meetings at least once a year. They meet, they discuss behind closed doors. No, the press was allowed, but they never could talk about it. They voted on policies that they were going to take back to their respective countries. And they did, because they had mucky mucks in Europe and in Japan that took the policies they voted on and took them back to their home countries and implemented those policies. And this is exactly what they were doing in America. And all of a sudden it hit us. Our executive branch has been hijacked by this group to implement a set of policies that were international in nature, had no vetting from our own Congress or the American people whatsoever. There was no discussion about this on their part. They simply took over the executive branch to achieve their new international economic order. You follow what I'm saying here?
Oh, yes.
The importance of this?
Yep.
This was not a political takeover. It was an economic takeover, but they needed the political machinery to pull it off. They couldn't get it done unless they had the ability to push the political machinery to reform or transform the economic system. This is key to understand, even today, that technocracy is economic in nature. It isn't a political system, it's an economic system. So, the original trilateral policy, as they wrote in their own documents, was to foster a new international economic order. It was all over their literature. We read everything they wrote. We got every pamphlet, booklet, magazine, all the articles the scholars wrote. We had it all piled up and cataloged. This is what they wanted to do. They promoted a concept of interdependence amongst nations. There wasn't a demand for this at the time, but they said, no, 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 the future is interdependence. We need to sew everything together. And then they promoted free trade like there was no tomorrow by dismantling all of the tariffs and the trade barriers around the world. This was key to their establishing of the new international economic order. This was their policy. And the book that set the course for this was Brzezinski's book, Between Two Ages, subtitle America's Role in the Technotronic Era. That's a concern. And still, even today, this is a concern. We have to take a look at what Brzezinski wrote in that book. Later, as I studied technocracy, by the way, I got to thinking maybe the word technocracy and technotronic are related. Maybe technotronic is just a synonym or something for technocracy. I went back and I read Brzezinski's book again, cover to cover, kind of lined up the themes and the thought patterns and stuff, the doctrines he was proposing. And by the time I was reading the book, I said, you can't call this plagiarism, but it was pure unadulterated technocracy from the 1930s. Mm-hmm. And guess where Brzezinski was a professor when he got tapped by Rockefeller? Columbia University.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Coincidence?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so. So Brzezinski set the course with this book, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. And we've got to understand this book if we're going to understand what's going on today. Brzezinski he defined in his book several stages of societal development. There was first the religious stage that he basically characterized as narrow-minded, and basically it was massive ignorance. He had a very dim view of the religious world that preceded all this stuff. Then there was the era of nationalism, where there was some sense of equality before the law as far as nations were concerned. That gave way to a stage of Marxism. And Brzezinski was not a Marxist, as he has been unfairly called a Marxist for many years. He was not a Marxist. I will stand on that today, and I can prove it, because he says in his book that Marxism represents a further vital and creative stage in the maturing of man's universal vision, close quote. He was not proposing Marxism, but he said it was a necessary stepping stone to get to the final stage, which is his technotronic era. That's what the book's about. So he writes about the technotronic era, that it's rational humanism on a global scale, and he called it the result of American communist evolutionary transformations. Oh, geez, there's that word again.
The result of American communist evolutionary transformations. Let's just chew on that one for a few seconds. Well, that lends credence to what Charlotte Iserbyt was saying about how Ronald Reagan had merged the educational systems of he and Gorbachev. We're merging the educational protocols between the former Soviet Union and the United States.
Yes.
I don't know, coincidence again?
Just no. Charlotte has it right. And education is a key part of technocracy, by the way. They have a complete agenda for education, and it is exactly what Charlotte has seen over the last 30 years, 40 years. So it's the result of American communist evolutionary transformation, but it is not American democracy or republic. It is not communist, Marxist communism. It's a new thing. It's literally a new thing that has not been seen on the face of the planet yet, but Brzezinski predicted is coming and we need Marxism to help us get there. But at some point, Marxism is going to be completely dumped, and technocracy or the technotronic era will take over. So this was his book. Well, Brzezinski had a very dim view of a lot of things. Americans get upset, for instance, at a quote like this that he wrote in his book. Again, remember, it's 1970. He wrote, quote, "The nation state, as a fundamental unit of man's organized life, has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation state," close quote. Now, I hate to say it, but Brzezinski saw this correctly.
Yes, he did. He wrote this 45 years ago.
That's right. We saw it wrongly. America has never understood this clearly. Brzezinski, okay, hats off to Brzezinski for being a very bright guy. He's evil maybe, but bright. He saw this correctly. We missed it. We didn't see it. We didn't see the threat. And so nobody lifted a finger to stop these people, even though we hopped up and down all over the place back in those days. We got my final program, by the way, my big one, was with Larry King, believe it or not, on the Mutual Broadcasting Network. I flew back to Washington, D.C. to sit across the table from the executive director of the Trilateral Commission. His name was Charles Heck. I gave him Heck. No, I didn't. But his name was H-E-C-K. He's actually a pretty nice guy. And I sat across the table from him. We're supposed to have a 1-hour interview, like point-counterpoint debate. The show got so hot with call-ins and stuff that Larry King let us go for 3 hours. And Larry is no conservative. He's as liberal as they come. And when the show was done, all he could say, well, he shook his head. He said, "I've never seen anything like this in my life." And he shook our hands, and we went away. And the next day, I got a call from B. Dalton Booksellers. And they said, "I don't know what you said on the radio, but people are wanting your book all over the country. We need to get on this." And I thought to myself, hot diggity dog, we're finally there, and we're going to get some big exposure here. So I sent books off. I expressed them off to B. Dalton headquarters, and I waited a week and nothing, no phone call. I finally called back 10 days later, and they said, "Well, we've decided we're not going to carry your book after all, but we'll special order it maybe for you."
Nice.
And I said, "Why is that?" Well, we started doing some research, and we found out that sure enough, the parent of B. Dalton Booksellers, Dayton Hudson, had a board member who was a member of the Trilateral Commission.
Oh, perfect.
Perfect, right. So they blacklisted us. And not only that, they sent a list around to all their stores saying that the book was out of print and the publisher was out of business. Now, my company was the publisher, the August Corporation, so I knew I had to take my temperature.
Yeah, you were pretty sure you weren't out of business.
Pretty sure I'm still alive. I think this was not, heaven or hell. And so we called several stores and oh, I'm sorry, but the book's out of print, the publisher's out of business. So we were blacklisted, flat out, unadulterated, blacklisted. And so we had fun with it. We went back to some of our radio show contacts and we said, "Hey, we got a deal for you. We know there's a B. Dalton bookseller right down the street from you. And let's have us back on the air and call them up from the studio and ask them to buy our book." And most of them would say, "Nobody gets blacklisted in America. Come on, that just doesn't happen here." I said, "Well, let's just try it. Trust me, let's try it." So they call them up. And they, "Hello, this is John B. Wells. I'm talking here with Patrick Wood, and I want to order his book, Trilaterals Over Washington." And as you shuffle, and "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, but that book is out of print and the publisher is out of business." And they say, "Well, but I have Patrick Wood on the line, and he's the publisher and the author, and he says he's not out of business and the book's not out of print."
Click.
And the poor girl. I mean, the clerks didn't know. They just had a job, right? They had no clue what was going on in the big scheme.
Well, they did up until the point that they answered the phone.
We did have some fun on that, and it didn't take the blacklist off, but for sure. but it was a scandal of major proportions as far as I'm concerned. That